Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our final closeout segment. To discuss special operations and the future of influence in practical terms, we are welcoming back Dr. Brad Rhinelander to host a discussion with Colonel Ed Croot, Lieutenant Colonel Sharon Engelmeier, and Lieutenant Colonel Sam Hayes. I will hand it over to Dr. Rhinelander. The floor is all yours, sir.
Thanks, Joe. Today, I think we're truly fortunate to have a trifecta of U.S. Army Special Operations capability with us, representing psychological operations, civil affairs, and special forces across the three of them. So without further ado, given the short time frame for this window, I'll turn it over to Colonel Ed Croot to begin today's conversation.
Hey, great. Appreciate it, Brad. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me. And on behalf of 1st Special Forces Command, Commanding General Major General Brennan, thanks for allowing us to be part of this conversation. Real quick, I think why you asked me here today probably starts with what I did last year at my Army War College year down at Duke University, in which I did a study called, or I looked at the question of whether or not Special Forces has an identity crisis. From my research, I feel like I proved that we did. And that identity was it was trifurcated, if you will, between 1/3 of our Special Forces formation that was felt like direct action, unilateral was our mission. 1/3 of the formation recognized that probably unilateral direct action is not what Army Special Forces is built for, but they had a very hard time applying our unique capability for the nation in the modern environment, in the near-peer environment with China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, for example. And then 1/3 of our formation actually could do both. They recognized our Title X mission and capability that we brought as a partner force, and that they could apply that in the modern environment. So why is that important? It was important for our SOF tribe to understand what our identity was. Because when you don't have a unified understanding of purpose, it can be extremely chaotic within your formation, and it'll prevent you from achieving what the nation needs you to achieve. And so the next part of this is I was then asked to become the Chief of Staff at 1st Special Forces Command by General Brennan and General Marks, the Deputy Commanding General, because they wanted to ask the question, okay, if we have an identity crisis in Special Forces, then what do we do about it? We want you to sit right here next to us to help figure that out. But we also want to ask this question. Do we also think that civil affairs and PSYOPs, represented today by Lieutenant Colonel Engelmeier, the 7th POB commander, and Lieutenant Colonel and Dr. PhD Sam Hayes from Civil Affairs, do they have an identity crisis? Well, my assessment there is they, to one degree or another, probably do, similar to the way that we do in Special Forces. But I also feel like we identified that we had a caste system within 1st SFC as well, meaning that Special Forces was always kind of the top of that caste, and that PSYOP and Civil Affairs kind of fell in a support role, okay? And so, you know, my closing opening comments to this is, what do you do about that? Is, well, first, we had to publish a vision, because in order for an organization to ensure that they have a shared identity and a common purpose, you got to have that one document. It's our vision statement written by General Brennan that orients all of our organizations toward one Northern Star. And so that's critically important. But then also, we have to address and get in there and think about that caste system. So, you know, Sharon and I, we were over at JSOU, and we experienced how General Miller approached what he would call a very similar caste system there, and how harmful that can be to an organization. And so by watching what General Miller did in 2017, we're trying to do the same thing here at 1st Special Forces Command. And so within the vision statement, we have a cross-functional team concept in which, depending upon where we are in the competition to conflict continuum, you may find PSYOP in the lead with SF and CA in support, or you might find Civil Affairs in the lead with SF and PSYOP in support. It doesn't necessarily just have to be Special Forces. And so it's really important that we have a shared RSOF identity as we move toward a common Northern Star for our nation, or that'll become problematic. And the only other point I would make is, in order to drive that change, because change is hard, not everybody immediately is going to read your vision statement and say, okay, boss, let's fall in. The next piece is we have to vote as leaders with our actions. So we can say it all day, but until we start doing tangible things like putting a cross-functional team together with a PSYOP battalion commander in charge and an SOF company and a civil affairs detachment underneath them, until we hire across our staff on the third floor here, our leadership positions, and put civil affairs and PSYOPs and heck, SOF intel professionals and support professionals into leadership positions, can we actually drive that change? Identity is critical. We are struggling a little bit with that identity coming out of the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, where, and it's not that anyone did anything wrong. We answered the nation's call, but it is time that we have to now evolve to what the nation needs of us now, and restructure our RSOF identity to get after what the nation's asking us to do. So I'll hold there and pass it over to the 7th POB Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sharon Engelmeier.
Hi, sir. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I agree. This is a great time, right, to be in PSYOP, to be in influence and under the first SFC umbrella. And something I think that we've always known, in the back of our minds and reading it, is how important information is. But it hasn't been as critical as it is now. And ISIS has been good in illuminating that for us, and then raising that to new caliber. And then as well with the, the mass news media that we've seen on the Russian influence in social media during the elections, I think it's becoming more widespread, and this is a great opportunity for us. So one thing that I would kind of challenge is, with these great opportunities, is we also have challenges. And specifically is we can't do things the same way as we did before in the past. One of those is, if we are going to be the leaders in the information space, in influence, we need to ensure that we're doing the right coordination and also investing in resources and growth. So that's kind of my segue into all of this, is we're going to continue forward when you do that. Something that we're able to capitalize right now, and there's more and more discussions, and as we're training our folks, is right, how does PSYOP integrate with information warfare in terms of electronic warfare, cyber? All of these capabilities have to be layered, so that synchronization and coordination is done at every single echelon. So every single team member, no matter where they are, needs to be able to do that. And then in terms of manning, I would argue that we got it right during the Cold War in terms of having folks at the most senior levels taking a look at this. Because I think we'd all agree is your perspective is based on where you sit. And so in order to have somebody that's able to coordinate and look at this across the board and speak to those influence equities, we need someone at the higher echelons looking down and synchronizing it. So I'll pause there and see if there's any other comments on that.
Thank you very much for that perspective, Lieutenant Colonel Engelmeier. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, we'll pass it over to you for your thoughts.
And thank you, Dr. Rhinelander. Thank you, sir, and Sharon for all those thoughts. I definitely would like to build upon it, looking at the question of practical impact of influence operations across the SOF enterprise. And when you look at it from an organizational lens, you really have two particular things we can focus on. One's internal to the organization, really get after the identity piece that Colonel Croot talked about, and then also talking about outside the organization operations, which really Sharon was kind of delving with that layered effect. And so when you start from the inside of the organization and really understanding and unpacking that caste system, you really have to get after the mindset. This environment has changed. We're no longer fighting our grandfather's wars. Even though important, we need to understand and empower our digital natives that are in our formation that has grown up with this technology, that we're in global power competition. And that means something. That means that the way we approach our adversaries is changing. We're no longer fighting face to face. We're fighting on the periphery, or we're fighting in economic areas that have the ability to shape how we fight in face to face and other battle specs. So empowering our soldiers' mindset to understand the art of the possible, to understand it is okay for our leaders to empower them to say, you might fail, but try something new. How do we combine civil affairs, SIOP, SF, cyber to really get after this competition space that our adversaries are actually leading us, and we need to pick up the pace to sense them. You know, Colonel Croot always talks about that we are the sensors. We see, we sense, and we have to paint that really great picture for Big Army. So when they are doing the calculus of where they choose to fight, we've painted a very good picture, not only for Big Army, for our international partners, and also for our GIM and interagency stakeholders. So having them to unleash that it's okay to try things different and to write off those mistakes and failures, because this is how we're going to really get across our organization the art of the possible. Then that will drive how we do the layering of information, how we do the layering of influence outside of organization. Once we unleash these talent that we have in our silos and break what we traditionally have done inside, we can also reimagine how do we fight? How do we see something that's happening in one geographic area, and now we can pass that information from the edge all the way back to our formation to say, how can we crash on this in 72 hours and support the guys downrange that need this information around, this cultural around, the ability to affect operations that we need on the edge. How do we layer that influence from not only from a CONUS perspective, but also drive the effects that we expose the weakness in our adversaries that change strategic operations to our good. This is a challenge that we operate in today. And if we tap the talent within our organizations, I think we might be amazed at what we find. Sometimes they just need the leaders to underwrite the ability and to empower them to think outside the box, to take the skills and the knowledge and abilities that we have trained them and say we're playing in a new space. So I'm really excited about where we are. I'm excited about where 1st Special Forces Command is going with the cross-functional team, because our soldiers are excited that they can reimagine how we compete. So I'll pause there, Dr. Rhinelander.
Thank you, sir. That's some great points. I really liked your our discussion last week. You'd mentioned, you used the term echelons of influence, and prioritizing, bottom-up innovation and really harnessing the joint force, digital natives coming up through the ranks, and everything that affect. In an earlier panel with Dr. Peter Singer, we discussed at length, the importance of narrative and storytelling. So just Colonel Croot or Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Lieutenant Colonel Engelmeier, if you could talk a little bit about the efforts that you're doing within USASOC internally, as far as, how you get that narrative right practically. I've perused some of your podcasts and found them very interesting, but I'll give you the opportunity to speak about that.
Sharon, I'll kick it over to you first.
So I'm smiling because I recently heard a quote, right? So 7th Battalion supports the AFRICOM AOR, and I recently heard a quote that said, in Africa, the most important person is a storyteller, right? And so I think that kind of goes to highlight, we have to be able to capitalize on that and to tell our story within as we continue to evolve and develop, and then also letting other folks. I would say that education is a big piece in all of this in terms of, on our end, to let, as Dr. Hayes kind of mentioned, let our folks know that it's okay to take some risk, that it's okay to put all this together. We have an extremely adaptive, creative force. One of the greatest things that I think we select for folks for in RSOF, and we have to better empower them. And then on the other hand is to educate folks outside of our formation in terms of what is in the realm of possible I don't need the task force commander necessarily on the ground knowing exactly what he needs in terms of the influence space, but I need to be that master of influence and let him or her know, hey, this is how we can best be utilized in order to maximize results on the ground. With that being said as well, something I'd like to also mention is we're talking about education. It's also in terms of what can we get in terms on the intel side. So the intel structure and educating folks at the senior levels in terms of how best can we leverage intel in ways that it hasn't been done before in order to identify what those vulnerabilities are and have dedicated collection assets and management to support IO, PSYOP, MILDEC, which typically require months of preparation. And so that's kind of my long-winded answer to that one. I'll pass it off.
Sam, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Sharon, I definitely agree. That art of that telling that story, and from a civil affairs lens, you have to look at how do we illuminate the human dimension? How do we not only build upon our face of trust that we broker as the ability to work within these spaces, but also to highlight for our adversary moments of weakness, to tell that story that can change the momentum in a given country. For an example, I'm reminded of a team that's recently come back, and they're sharing their story of how during the time of COVID, they were able to bolster and add resilience in the local PPE chain of protective equipment that helped the country they were partnering with. And then you had an adversary there that was giving PPE that was not functional, and it was done intentional. And they highlighted that. And the local government began to say, hey, we don't want to partner with this organization, this country. We want to stay with our US allies because it's not only helping us because we have better equipment, but also they're taking the time to invest in the lives on the ground. So the telling that story is really critical to show how we can reimagine operations, because it's not always about shooting a bullet. Sometimes it's about unpacking that story so that people feel that you truly care about them, and it happens to be in line with our U.S. goals and objectives. So therefore, it's a win-win. Sir?
Oh, great. The word I would use is authentic, right? Because that means something. Totally agree with both Sharon and Sam. So I'll take this cut on the question from this angle. You mentioned P.W. Singer, and I'd also like to weave in our digital natives that we've discussed. So P.W. Singer, first chapter of Like War, he describes how through information and influence, ISIS on social media reduced the Iraqi government forces from 25,000 to 2,500. They won the war before they crossed the border. And so that's the new kind of like war that Peter Singer talks about. Who's natural in this space is our digital natives, right? I mean, our Generation Z now, I've heard Generation C, COVID, come out here in the last month. But the digital natives that we have now, we need to trust and empower them and get out of the way and let them compete in this space with our adversaries. I just posted for everybody an article that came out 8 days ago called The Lessons from the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. And John Antal does a really good analysis and gives 10 lessons learned about how Azerbaijan was able to defeat Armenia through a convergence fight. Okay. And a big piece of that was this information and influence. So not only did they use cyberspace, drones to their advantage, they also won the information war, which ultimately drove the Armenian leadership to back off that conflict line. Okay. And so that article is a quick five-page read. Recommend folks take a look at that if they haven't seen it. So now last point is then let's talk about from the edge to a place where we can influence. And we want to do that at 1st Special Forces Command. We think we have the market cornered on not only SOF, not only Army, but DOD influence capability, and that's our PSYOPers. Okay. And so at the edge, we know that we can see and sense things that others can't. most of the gym is going to find itself in a lot of capitals. But our command, any morning I wake up, our report shows that we're in 70 to 75 countries every morning. If you layer in our SOF brothers and sisters, MARSOC Raiders, Navy SEALs, AFSOC, and how they're engaging globally on behalf of our TSOCs under SOCOM, you really have an RSOF global network blanket that can see and sense in this competition space. So that's part one. But you know what? None of that matters if we can't move information in hours or minutes and get it in the hands of not only the intelligence community, but also into, like, for example, our Information Warfare Center, to take that one puzzle piece that comes in, wrap intelligence and IRCs around it, and be able to build out that influence option to then rapidly pass to a gym partner. That could be the gym WIC at SOCOM, in which that point they would deliver that influence option through social media. And the idea is, if we stay right now, if we continue to put ourselves in the way of how to move fast in this influence and information space, by waiting for people to ask for that, we're never going to get 3 weeks ahead of the Chinese protests. We're always going to be 3 weeks behind. We have to move fast in this space. And the way to do that is to be able to move the information fast, collaborate quickly, and then pass it to the right gym partner to pass that influence option. And the idea is, by layering in multiple influences options, we can then be able to scarlet letter, air quotes, our adversaries by calling out all of the things that they're doing in the different countries and partners, nations around the world, in that, calling attention and illuminating what they're up to. And that's an incredibly important part of what we offer, we believe, in SOF to our gym partners. So again, enabling, empowering and enabling those digital natives, and then putting in place the systems for them to be able to do this quickly is how we're going to get after it.
I appreciate that, sir. Yeah, I think it's somewhat amusing to follow some of the DoD social media accounts, and I think we talked last week about I think that the Navy, I think they've got some fired up E5s that are really timely, putting out memes and everything else. It's interesting to watch. Lieutenant Colonel Engelmeier, you spoke about the golden hour when it comes to information and influence. If any of the three of you could just talk a little bit about the policy changes with respect to authorities and permissions that you've seen come about, and where we need to get so that you can respond agilely on some of these transregional problems. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at that one first. So exactly what Colonel Croot talked about is we need to be able to digest this information and send it out quickly. I think across the board, we have the authorities that we need. Now it's about making sure that people are comfortable and understand what those capabilities are and potentially some of the implications. And then pushing it down to those folks that are able to quickly respond. I mean, we have the technology right now to quickly go ahead and send the information out to different units to coordinate. COVID has taught us a lot about teleworking in terms of connecting people in regions. You don't necessarily have to be in the same room to have the discussion. So just across the board is just getting folks more comfortable and then executing and having short-term wins in order to gain momentum just across the board.
So it sounds like, that a lot of that is probably a lot of senior leader education at times too, on the capabilities and actually understanding risks and everything else.
Right, so I'd say it's a combination across the board, right? It's at the senior leader level and then also at the junior level, because those are the folks that are able to look across the spectrum and seize these opportunities and then send it back. You can't have one person inside of a meeting and then also constructing it. We need folks at every single level able to communicate, and then for folks to understand, okay, been there, seen that, I know exactly what they're asking for and what they need, and then to allow them to continue forward in order to demonstrate results.
Thank you, ma'am. So
can I add something to that real quick?
Go ahead, sir.
I'll give everybody the 3 R's. And so Sharon and I work together over at JSOC. And when you're trying to move fast in this space, two things come to mind. Number one, and General Miller used to call these rice bowls, risk and reluctance. And, the education piece and the communication piece is so critical. So for an example, how he got after that, when he looked at how information was moving from the edge, this is 2016, to OGP, an XOps platform, he knew that there was a data problem back at the, back at the location, but really the front side was more important to him. He's like, hey, right now, current policy says that when we get a piece of intelligence, we have to classify it immediately, secret no foreign, right? And so even if I can move this information quickly back to somebody that can use it, I then have to take the time to translate it and then declassify it. And that could take 72 hours. And I keep finding myself being 24, 48 hours behind the attack in Belgium or whatever, even though we had the puzzle piece. And so, he very boldly taught us all how to ask the hard question about policy, right? And to go communicate openly, to Sharon's point, with decision makers in Washington, D.C. to say, hey, if we were to just make this a piece of paper, and it's just a piece of paper as we move it quickly until we can translate it, pass it to the Belgians or whatever partner can use it, and then classify it and put it into our intelligence community, that would that's asking a very simple question about a policy that's probably ancient and doesn't make sense. And so in order to get past the rice bowls, risks, risk aversion and reluctance, it is all about asking hard questions and communicating with our teammates on how to make them comfortable and then create the right systems in place for us to be able to do what we need to do to move at this speed.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we spoke yesterday. I think it's come up in quite a few panels about the often self-inflicted wound of overclassification and the difficulties we have as a result of that. Question from the audience, kind of relevant to this, and information is not constrained by regional boundaries, nor is influence. So how do you address trans-regional problem sets while also working within a GCC? A geographic combatant command structure and their requirements.
Guys, you want me to tackle that one? Okay, real quick. Let me just say real quick. If you use the OGP XOps model, right, and the lessons that they learned, we realized that what we in SOF have that no one else has is a trans-regional understanding. And what they learned there over 8 years that we all don't want to relearn as we transition out of the GWAT and back to the competition fight is, in order to do that, you have to have folks that are looking at it from a threat perspective, but also from a regional perspective. And so if you look at our vignette that we use in the in our vision, we're pointing out that, hey, what our regionally aligned 3rd Group and Sharon's 7th Psychological Operations Battalion and the 91st Civil Affairs Battalion, they are regionally aligned to Africa. So what they see and sense the Chinese doing is they pass those back to the IWC. We recognize that, hey, we can disrupt China in Africa. We understand that. And so our ability to see it, sense it, build an option, and offer it to the GCC to deliver is what we're trying to say there. It is very difficult when we talk in the Army lanes for us with the multi-domain operations concept with the Army and Army Futures Command. They struggle with this. They don't naturally understand the trans-regional picture that we have. And so it's so important that we not relearn that again, what we just learned in the GWAT, and really just transition this over and start to apply the same approaches that we had in targeting methodologies in this new fight to get after the trans-regional piece. I'll kick it over to Sam.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I definitely would like to build upon what you said. That trans-regional picture is so critical. And to get to your question, Dr. Rhinelander, about the gaps and seams between the regions is critical. And I'm really excited about what the IWC is doing at this. They're not only looking at that trans-regional problem, but they're looking at the threat. And when you look at the threat, you can see a pattern emerge across regions. And so if you have an indicator or a playbook in Africa that might be similar to Europe, now you can do predictive analysis to say, hey, not only is this gap between Africa and Europe exists, but what are the indicators that I'm seeing in Africa that I might see in Europe, or that these indicators I'm seeing in Europe that I might see in South America that are so critical when you look at a threat perspective. So the layering on how we look at our enemies and our adversaries is critical because it's not always tied to a geographic location. And sometimes we miss that. And we miss what's happening in the gaps and seams. So having that complete picture for us, as we sense in the human domain, is critically important.
Yeah, and to kind of add a different dimension to that is, while our software, I think, is a small community, right? And we start to know each other a little bit more and more, and we can reach out. Again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is your perception is based on where you sit. So right now, my perception is different from if I was going to have, a different job after this, or who knows what. But we rely heavily on our interagency partners to kind of inform us, to say, okay, this is what we're taking a look at. These are the trends that we're seeing. We're not doing this alone. Anything we're talking about, VEOs or other competition space, we're relying heavily, and we're constantly in those discussions, whether here it is stateside or forward deployed to different locations. Its communication is huge. And, shrinking that bubble in terms of who's operating in that space in order to say we're all on the same team, we're looking at from different perspective, and then bringing in those additional databases, I think is a force multiplier across the board.
Thank you, ma'am. That brings us to another audience question. You mentioned the interagency partners and how important those partnerships are. A question from the audience about other joint service contributions to influence efforts.
Sam, you want to jump on that first?
Yes, thank you, sir. So in our space, civil affairs has really been tasked as that CivMil integrator. And oftentimes what we see is, as not only does he pass information, we can also create a picture that's holistic, and it also tackles the problem from multiple perspectives. For example, oftentimes SOF is in that short-term fight. We have multiple reps in a country, our deployments are short in nature, and we can move the football between teams and companies. But the layering of our interagency partners have that long-term perspective. As Sharon talked about, the trends that they can bring, that long-term perspective. And when we marry the two, it provides a unique advantage, not only for our interagency, but also for the Department of Defense. In between that, we have the ability to leverage our different perspectives to bring our U.S. goals and objectives into reach for our nation.
Thank you, sir.
And if I may just add on to that is, right, nobody owns exactly the perfect solution across the board. We rely heavily on our joint partners. So the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, they all bring a different perspective and also different capability. Even if one is, focused in an area, another can be focused in another. And again, it goes back to that layering of different effects at different times and understand those capabilities. Several years ago, I was also able to do a fellowship over at what is now Department of State's Global Engagement Center. So allowing those opportunities for folks to go out, see, touch something else, and bring those back. As a PsyOper, I look across the spectrum, and these are all different dissemination platforms that we can utilize to achieve our end state on the far right.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think this generation of SOF, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines, I think we're inherently joint, and I think we're inherently interagency now because of our experiences the last 20 years. It's almost second nature for me to think about, okay, who else can we support, or who else needs to know this information, or who else do I need to pull in to try and team a solution to get after this? It's almost second nature, I think, to this point for us.
Thank you, sir. So we have another audience question. With the shift to GPC, do you expect a change in the manner we conduct info ops? The competition space is vastly different with the actors' capabilities and induced risk being on another level.
Sharon, you want to go first?
So I would say there's probably a slight shift, but across the board, it goes back to the basics, right, of making sure that decision makers have all the understanding, and we are clearly communicating what those opportunities are, and then leveraging across the board all those different dissemination platforms. It could be from cyber, AI, bots, I mean, you name it. Those are just different mechanisms. But the way we process the information, the way we collect it, the way we communicate it, I don't think necessarily changes a whole lot. But again, the effect that we're trying to achieve is going to be tailored from what we, inherently have been doing the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I'd like to build upon Sharon's point. I think there's more planes that we'll take into consideration. For example, the physical, we've been playing in that space. We understand the indicators. Now you're going to add the virtual. So some of us haven't been playing in that space. And then you're going to add the cognitive. So now you have 3 different planes as we're trying to reconcile information, and you're trying to get a holistic picture. Same methods, different indicators we might have to look at, but when we reconcile it and synthesize that information, it's going to produce a more powerful picture to understand exactly where people are competing. For example, as climate and lack of resources drives new places that people are going to be competing, how do we anticipate? How do we see that? It might not be sexy. It might not be what we looked at in the past, but it's definitely a part of our environment today. And we just have to really understand all the calculus so we can provide decision makers with the right amount of information to make informed decisions. The last thing I like to say is, as individuals paint themselves in the physical, they might be different in the virtual. They might be different in the cognitive. And reconciling all that information is going to provide a better picture of who we're dealing with in any given plane.
Yeah, all I'd add is I think what we have to do is understand how fast this is now. So the concept of time, an influence option that Sharon and her PsyOpers build might, we might see it and we got about 48 hours to do something about it. It's got to be uniquely built for a threat audience, a friendly audience, a neutral audience to have an effect, and it needs to be delivered, because in today's day and age, you don't address that within 48 hours, it's on to the next news cycle. It's on to the next, opportunity. So speed is I think a difference and a change from what it used to be. And if you could, Dr. Rhinelander, I shared that article on my Zoom chat, but if you could push that to the larger audience, I think that it may be different. Look at how long that conflict took, right? I think it was 6 weeks. And it was the speed of information, first and foremost, that drove a nation to capitulate in that conflict. And so I think that's something that we absolutely have to think about. And that's why authorities and approvals and permissions and data solutions, all of that is so important, or we won't be able to go fast to be able to compete.
Thank you, sir. That brings us to a question from Dave Maxwell about it's of interest to me during my doctoral research. One of the when I was interviewing State Department professionals, one of the things that was mentioned more than once was the problem of staff overmatch between DoD and some of our smaller interagency partners. So the question from Dave Maxwell is, the relationship with the State Department Global Engagement Center, and how effective that partnership is, how effective the Global Engagement Center is, and is it synchronizing influence through the whole government?
Sharon, since you did well, first, hello to Dave Maxwell. And for, as an SF guy, I read Dave Maxwell's morning emails for 20 years. So it's great to see him on here. And hopefully we got the vision right after he gave us some UW critiques. But let me pass it over to Sharon, who did her internship there.
Yeah, so I do also want to say hello to Dave Maxwell. I think I've been bumped off of those emails, or maybe he's not sending them out anymore. But I did enjoy them when I was stationed up in DC as well. I'd say across the board, that is something that we definitely need to keep in mind in terms of, not pushing ourselves, being invited to the table for those discussions, and then being able to perform at a level where we're not, overly aggressive, knowing who our partners are. And I think across the board, we have seeing that DoD is invited to the table, we're able to discuss and insert folks to achieve results. But yeah, I mean, I saw it when I was at the State Department. You see it overseas. We definitely need to keep that in mind, but then again, not shy away from it. You know, come to the table, same as before. Be aggressive in the terms of what we're presenting, but know how it can also be perceived on the other end.
Sam, let me hit something real quick. I'll just give something for folks to think about. So I'm going to use the explosion in Lebanon as an example. Okay. And so our PsyOpers built the message for the State Department, and it looked just like this: a C-130 landing, and we carried off aid in uniform to the Lebanese people. That's a message. Great. We sat here. If you look at the multi-domain operations framework for the Army, it mentions unconventional warfare 33 times. If you look at what Russia and China are doing, we sat here going, we would also like to do some messaging that shows that this was Russia's fault, right? But that request didn't come. So maybe we can get to the point someday where on our side, we actually build that aggressive Psy-war type of an influence option. Not that we have the authority or would move to deliver it, but be able to present it for consideration. So that if the State Department determines, nope, we don't want to go there in this event, thanks for building that, great. Or without being asked for it, we have it there as an option for them to utilize. Their call. That could be the State Department, the CIA, you name the interagency partner. So that's kind of the conversation we have in this headquarters, our role in this fight. Sam?
So interestingly enough, though, recently I saw, State Department officials overseas who were more aggressive than the military senior leaders. And so I think across the board, it just comes into play of this is specific personalities. And whenever we have these sort of discussions is understanding everybody's equities at the table and how they want to proceed forward and not overstepping anyways. And then coming out of there with a unified cross-functional message in terms of, okay, this is where we're going to head in what particular venue it is.
Rice bowls, risk, and reluctance. Sam?
Yeah, Sharon, sir, definitely great points. And some of the things that we see as we interact with the interagency, that there's a difference of culture. And you have to recognize that they move at a different pace than we move, but it's not impossible for us to work together. So bridging the culture is critically important. And then also as we're challenging ourselves to break those silos and mentalities to bring the best out of each of our organizations into a cross-functional team to leverage, there's opportunity to do that with the interagency. As they're young and up and coming rising stars, once we create more touch points with our, we have stock and exercises coming up here in September, we're inviting the interagency. As we develop at First Special Forces Command, our SOF TC, where we're having this ability to do a training to invite interagency into that space. The more touch points and the reps we have, we can break down those cultural walls to see what is the art of possible for there. Because Sharon, you're absolutely right. We see it, we recognize it, and the experience and the relationships we develop over a career, we can break through that because we have the touch points, we have those relationships, we can speak their lexicon. And not everyone has that technical patience to receive to get the job done.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to combine two questions from the audience. We had a question about the role of the private sector and the lack of governance in that information space. And I'll combine that with another question about additional lines of communication that need to be built to streamline delivery globally and normalize the effort. We've talked about the interagency, we've talked about the joint force. Could one of you speak for a little bit about the commercial sector, private sector?
Yeah, I definitely want to take that one. Hey, thanks, Dr. Reiller. So you have it from two different perspectives, right? You have it from a point of innovation. So we have the ability to work with not only with academia, but also the private sector to say, hey, we're having difficulties getting this thing. Can you help us with that thing? And those are natural relationships that we're exploring every day. that helps us to figure out what we don't know because they operate in that space. But then there's another opportunity that we can do with the private sector, which is on the ground operationally. Sometimes beyond our reach, we partner with local NGOs. And we might work with them in a given area to say, hey, you have that niche capability that we need. We're going to support your efforts to provide X resource to the local population that needs it. And those times in the operational sense, they help us to expand our reach, punch above our weight in areas that we just don't have that capacity. So there are times that back at home station, for innovation reasons, we might work with the private sector. And there's times that we might work with local NGOs to help us build that resiliency in a given region. So those are some points that we kind of work with them.
Sharon, got anything?
So I'll go back to, the idea that iron sharpens iron. In terms of new tech that comes out there from the private sector, that further enables us. However, we also have to realize that that also empowers the adversary, and those technologies do spread very quickly. That's more of an administrative question into the direction of where that will go moving forward. However, I would say that, same thing as Dr. Hayes mentioned is that we need to be able to leverage those, have those conversations, invite those types of private sectors, academia, because a lot of people do want to help out. They do want to see how their technology is being used to further, decrease poverty, raise education levels. And I think across the board that goes, in line with a lot of our efforts as well. Sir, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, my comment on this one is I'll claim the academic freedom here this is a book we have everybody in our command read. It's called The Kill Chain by Chris Brose. Chris Brose was Senator McCain's senior policy advisor. And when Senator McCain died, he promised him that he would write a book on what they had just witnessed for the last 15 years. And what they propose is take the military industrial complex and add in Congress, call it the Iron Triangle, and we're in trouble because at the pace that we can work with academia and industry in our country and benefit from it, there's a lot of things in the way. And if we compare that to how China uses their industry and their people and their students, et cetera, and so on, we're competing on we're way behind the power curve in how to compete in that space with how a near peer is utilizing their industry. So probably something's got to change in that area so we can move a heck of a lot faster. We added an innovation division within our G8 to try and cheat at this and try and find the industry that's furthest along with a gap that we have to try and glom onto them. But it's not easy right now. And, we absolutely have to find ways to benefit from academia and industry way better than we are right now. That's our take, though, at the academic level.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Lieutenant Colonel Engelmeier, we're about out of time, but I'll turn it over to you for any final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Dr. Reiller. My biggest thing is protect those digital natives. We have talent within our formation. They just need the opportunity to experiment, opportunity to unwrite their risk, because they are closer to what we need them to be able to help us move in the new space. That mindset of saying, hey, this is a new environment, let's experiment, is critical to foster within our ranks. Oftentimes we go out to places that don't look like us, and to take those different perspectives, it is critical for our mission success. So that's the one thing I want to leave.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Engelmeier, you get the last word.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to say, if we're talking about practicality for the RSOF enterprise, is that we definitely need to be aggressive and not do things the same way. I think we're heading in the right direction across the board, and definitely pushing the envelope, saying what is in the realm of possible across the board, getting our folks to think that way, communicate that way, and then develop, unique solutions within the cross-functional teams, because everyone else is going to come in with a different perspective and a solution that will enable us to, further propensate what we're trying to achieve. And thank you for the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I truly enjoyed our conversation last week and today. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it. That was an amazing conversation. And I want to join Ed and Sharon in saying hi like everybody else did to Dave Maxwell. Thank you all very much for outlining much of the current thinking in special operations in this continued era of strategic competition. I will complete this 2-day journey of our exploration of the SOF identity through SOF utility, SOF ethics, technology, and then diversity and inclusion with a few parting words from our JSOU President, Dr. Ike Wilson, and the U.S. SOCOM Deputy Commander, Vice Admiral Szymanski. Dr. Wilson, the floor is all yours.
Hey, Dr. Long, Joe, thanks very much. And panelists and participants, just let me say I've been with you, was with you yesterday morning. I was with you virtually right along with the rest of you as the participating virtual audience all day today, off and on. Phenomenal sets of ideas and consultative forum discussions. Happy to be with you here at the beginning of Closeout. I'll reserve my closing to the closing at the very, very end, but it's my great honor, first and foremost, and pleasure to introduce to everyone and turn it over to Vice Admiral Tim Szymanski, Deputy Commander, United States Special Operations Command. Sir, the floor and the microphone is yours.
Doc Wilson, Ike, thanks a lot. Hey, first, and before I forget, let Joe, I just wanted, Dr. Long, I wanted to give you a huge shout out here for pulling this together. It was just in the green room waiting with Ike and the team, working behind the scenes there, and you pulling this together in both thought leaders and practitioners, and then organizing it in a manner and method to really get the most out of this exploration. So shout out to you and the team, and then Ike to you and the rest of your faculty, as well as particularly your guys' innovation. It might not seem like a lot of innovation with trying to get us to use these tools and this IT piece, as well as being able to reach out and connect folks during hopefully what we're seeing is the back end of the pandemic, whether that's real or not. Yeah, agreed. So, but what, in like most things, out of necessity, you become innovative, right? And so the aspect of being able to use technologies like this, I think we are a real learning organization, not only out of intellectual curiosity, but also out of necessity. And this has given us a great opportunity to connect. And so, up front, you really would love to, obviously it's never as good as being face-to-face, but what it does provide, the alternative is it potentially provides us a wider, a more diverse audience than we might be able to get physically together in one space. And so you get the expertise of and diversity aspects of this forum. I guess another, for those that are speakers and as public speaking is the largest fear for most people, it does give you a little bit of a standoff from a public speaking perspective. At this point, you do get nervous a little bit about, the only thing I'm nervous about today is I haven't been listening for the last 2 days, and you guys have information advantage over me, which is part of the joint warfighting concept. And this is truly the moment in the movie Doctor. So it's really good to be here and kind of just joking aside, to kind of just think about and what you guys have been talking about for the last 2 days in SOF identity, and the sub bullets to what you've looked at this week, or these last couple of days, I think really important. And you pick topics that are near and dear to my heart, but they're obviously contemporary as well with not only what's going on, in the military and the change in administration, but what's going on, internationally and socially and domestically. I think it's the topics are absolutely relevant to the shaping of this conversation. I think, if I've got this right, I can see Ed Croot's up well too, and I remember reading his paper a few months back on the suffering from identity crisis. And Ed, I hope what I'm not going to say is that we don't have an identity crisis. I think we have an identity public relations deficit. But I think we know exactly where we want to go, looking at our past. I'm not stealing intellectual property from Ike. I'm calling it SOF. He's got the fourth generations and all. I'm just calling it SOF 5.0. But it's amazing how much sort of what, if you think about the SOF vision and the strategy and where we think we need to be aligned under national security strategy, and we have a new one out that really doesn't change a few of the key points. It changes a few things that we will have to kind of manage. But in reality, I think we are going to see there's a lot of consistent themes that run through that. And I believe that helps us shape not only what we're doing now, but our identity going forward in the future. And I absolutely believe, now it's hard at the tactical edge. I think it's hard for folks to understand, as they come in and they force generate to do one thing, and to have to help them understand where we need to go as the strategic environment changes, as well as what we may have to do in the future. But when you think about, there's a couple key narratives. Narratives are, and maybe it's imperatives. We don't have them necessarily written down in exactly like this in our documents, but this is kind of the themes that I use when I talk to external audiences of where SOF is and where we have to go. Storytelling is always important, and it helps kind of convey. So, obviously we got the crisis response, and we're on an unclass forum, and we're not going to talk about that. And to be able to do that in the future strategic environment, it's going to take a lot of forced adaptation and change, right? But it's going to still look like a lot of, at the end of the day, during execution, it's going to sort of have that same effect. Then we got then as you come back into the national defense strategy and the national security strategy, then you have the 5 threats, and VEO is still high on that list. It's on the list, let's say. And we just can't afford to do VEO in the strategic environment the way we've been doing it for the last 19 years. When you think about the other threats and challenges in the strategic environment, right? So, how does SOF? And it's really more of a SOCOM issue. This is not about. I'll come to the SOF identity here in a moment. The competition. So how does competition play into the strategic context? And I think you guys, I saw that as one of the panels here earlier in the week when we talked about SOF utility and SOF's role in that. Really important because we absolutely believe we have a role in that. So if we have, this is why I say it's not always just a SOF identity. It's a SOF narrative internal to DoD. Because a lot of folks in DoD, a lot of senior leaders see us through that VEO CT lens, and they don't remember our past in other conflicts and other times, and particularly during the brief interlude between the Cold War and what we were calling low intensity conflict, which probably should be renamed. and to where we, to where we're at today, and some of the role we had during that interlude. And I know, again, don't want to steal Ike's pieces there, but and then the last piece, so the competition, and you guys talk a lot about that utility. That one's a hard one to pin down, because the force, and this comes to Ed's thesis, right? The force for the last 19 years has, to outsiders, and even to some of our senior leaders, like I just mentioned, has almost looked the same, has become fungible in their terms. I don't consider it that we are, but to outsiders and the way we do business. But we have developed a mindset. In 19, 20 years, you got 2 or 3 generations in there. Everybody that in 05 command or below, and some 06 commands, came in after 9/11. Right. So this is all they know in practice. And then they go through their selection and training courses, and they get the history. But sometimes it's easy in practice to stop and reflect on that history, which takes me to the fourth narrative that I always try to talk about in light of the National Defense Strategy. And we're going to get a new one, but it's going to be a skinny interim, like we did with the administration just releasing the National Security Strategy. And like I said, there's going to be a consistent theme in there with peer adversaries, right? And so a few have heard me speak before. This is truly the Kill Cullen book, where we, SOCOM, has to be able to stand on the head of the snake called VEO, violent extremist organizations, and be able to spar or randori with the bear or the dragon. And that's where the role of competition and soft utility becomes really, really important for 2 reasons. One, I think first, it provides us 3 things. One, it helps build those partner relationships. And so where we've been around the world with our soft CT partners, we're in places, globally where China and Russia would love to be. And so in essence, at a very tactical essence, we're a block, if nothing else, to that to partner of choice, if you want to call it that, in some places, but at least in an area to illuminate as well. So I think it becomes important, and there's probably, as we realize that, I think we can learn more to how we can illuminate malign activity. How we can message, how we can do those other types of things, particularly as in this administration, as diplomacy and development take a larger role, and military takes a more supporting role to that. SOF has done that for a long time through our civil affairs and the country teams and our MISO and all those things that we typically, it is one of our strengths with teaming, which is one of the key aspects of the SecDef's 3 priorities, right? And as well as, I think this is the important piece, and this is, I think, sometimes where internally we might struggle with the identity crisis, and it comes to one of your other key subtopics today, and that's the relationship with technology, because the third piece of competition is we potentially, and where we're placed in the activities we're invested in and the relationships we have with partners, may be able to provide us, if it does not deter, it may be able to provide us an off-ramp pretty quickly from something that's escalating, or at least localize a crisis that may be, be starting to boil, or at least definitely report on it, right? So, but I think the last piece, and this is important, then we go back to our roots. If you think about how we evolved, over the 70 or plus years, depending on what organizations you come from, our role, when you think about the joint warfighting concept, again, I know we're at the unclassed level, and the services constructs for how they're going to fight are still going to be heavily reliant, and they may not know it yet, and maybe it's my opinion, on what we would typically have historically called, almost to our roots, advanced force operations. And where it could be the elements that are for, doing the competition, or it could be what we're doing in some of our core competency skills that some will say have degraded. I think we've maintained them, maybe not to the standard of excellence that we once had, but I think most of our soft components are re-energizing their core competencies in that area, and they will be important. In a new, it's not going to be, it could be, it's not going to be the naked warrior swimming across the beach with a K-bar to mark the beach. So it's going to be those same sorts of advanced force operations with 21st century skills and competencies, the aspects of cyber, the access, the aspects of space. And so that's the narratives that I typically give that hopefully we can start to frame, and continue the discussions on SOF identity. So, but let me jump to two of your other two subtopics real quickly. And I know I've already gone about 15, 16 minutes here, and I'll try to wrap it up in the next 5. But the ethical decision-making, really important. And with the nexus of technology that I just kind of alluded to, and then the diversity inclusion piece, I think becomes really, really important, right? And on the ethical considerations, we really have to think about how we train and educate the force for decentralized, complex decision making. And there will need to be flexibility in there for what we pride ourselves on in SOF, and which is a tenet of even of the U.S. military writ large, is the decentralized execution. You go to war, and I'm stealing from the chairman. You go to war slowly and deliberately, but when you have to act, you have to act boldly and decisively. And that will be important not only for those off ramps we talked about previously in competition, but in those advanced force operations and other things that we may be asked to do on the leading edge. What makes us unique is the problem solving and the creativity of our people, and that's not necessarily going to change with technology. I quoted this the other day, and it's my own quote, and CG wrote it down. So he was preparing for us. I don't think he's going to use it in testimony, but and it's in my talking points here about because I'm coming to diversity and inclusion here in a minute, but it's also this nexus of the technology piece and our role of using it in the loop, on the loop, AI, data, machine learning, all the buzzwords out there. And if you think humans are more important than hardware, I think in SOF 5.0, it's not a soft truth, but I absolutely believe data management and software run a really close second. And this aspect of what you talked about this week on technology and the relationships with technology is something we continually have to get after. And as I started with, I was going to talk a little bit about the strategic vision, but when you think about our future operating concept, I'm talking out in the future, the force design aspects of where we're headed, a reimagined X, a hyper-enabled team, hyper-enabled warrior, that technology and those emerging technologies, particularly in data and data management and human machine interface, are really going to be accelerators, game changers, only if we push. But if we limit ourselves, one of the talking points that I had was, avoid the traps where the tech solutions are expected to solve human problems. I don't worry about that, and our humans will not let the tech define who they are or take them over, in my opinion. Again, Ed. But we still have some messaging. We have some internal aspects to get the force there in it, because we're always stuck in the employment phase, the force employment. Why, as we think about force development, But as we really think about future force design, it becomes critical that we think about that relationship. And I think your forum did a nice job of getting after that this week and I'm hoping, I can't wait to see the readout. And then the last thing I'll close with, and I think I skipped there quickly from the technology and how that, that I was really kind of trying to tie that to the complex decision making that will be required from the youngest members of our force at the front edges of the fight. And there will be times where the answer is not going to be there for them, and the ethical answer is not going to be there for them either, and they may have to divert. And then when they divert, do we have the play? If that diversion takes them to places that no one should have to go or decide, to prevail, how do we develop the resiliency in the force, in our processes, in our training pipelines to allow the force to heal, to reconstitute, self-healing, and come back stronger, lethal, more resilient. And I think that's really important. Which brings me to close out with the last piece, and that's the diversity and inclusion piece. To me, this is an easy operational imperative. Diversity and inclusion. I talked about it up front. Just the aspect of doing this forum on this net. We probably learned things this week on this and added richness to this discussion that would not have happened if we only did it in a physical setting, because we wouldn't have had probably some of the luminaries that were able to participate and share their wisdom and come at it from a different angle and provide us that. So it's no different. And I'll leave the team. I see I got largely a military audience left, and I'll make a plug for the commander here. And it's not a plug for the commander because I absolutely believe it. Is that this is sometimes a blind spot in special operations. We are really, really good about, I talked about, partners, interagency partners, teaming. We're really good about teaming externally. Sometimes internally, we have some blind spots on how we internally build because of our pipelines, and then how combat support and combat service support come into the formations. We're really good when people kind of prove their worth, and that's what I think that not the blind spot. I think the blind spot, I'd like to move that out a little bit further, so I don't have to stretch, or so my peripheral vision goes a little further right. We should assume their value and their contribution first. This is the aspect of Admiral McCraven's "you can't search, trust," right? But I think we should be trustworthy of folks that come to us who want to be part of the team. And that's a tough thing for SOF, because we want them to show. We're from Missouri. We want them to show us. We don't want to take it on face value. But the aspect I really wanted to leave you with that I was getting to was this is the real blind spot. Anytime we get into conversations on diversity and inclusion as it applies to the special operations formations, we quickly go to a standards discussion, and we're not going to lower standards. And I always, get a little aggravated by that comment, because I'm like, what did I say in about diversity and inclusion that had anything to making us strong or lethal that had anything to do about with changing standards? How do we lift barriers to inclusion and appreciate the different aspects? When we start thinking about hyper-enabled teams, teams of the future, we might not be in small groups close to the X. We may have deep geek teams that are supporting us in some sort of incredible cyber and space overwatch that are right there in our heads with us virtually and as necessary and imperative as the 60 gunner walking behind us. It won't be a 60 gunner then. It will be some sort of electric ray gun. But this aspect of standards really, my typical reply to them when they say that is not this long soliloquy here, but it is that no, there's one standard that has changed, and it's a higher standard. It's my expectations that you will be more inclusive and that you've opened your mind to the aspects of inclusion. We are not going to necessarily change physical, cognitive, psychological, other standards for service. So I think that becomes, a key part to our SOF identity as we move forward. It's a really key issue right now, and it has been for a while. And I think this new reflection on it gives us an absolute exciting opportunity to help in the SOF identity, but also think about SOF 5.0 and where we need to be as a more lethal and diverse force going forward. Hey, Ike, I'm done. I went on a rant there, and I'm going to pass it back to you. But thanks for giving me an opportunity to close out on this really important exploration on SOF identity. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, sir, thanks so much. And I would not call that a rant. I would call that a closing the loop and making this a virtuous cycle that we started yesterday morning in this 2-day event. So DCOM, thanks so much. And frankly, not just for your closing comments today, but as the commands, as our senior executive leader and mentor, frankly, mentor and coach on all matters relating to SOF education, leader preparation, and leader development. I just want to say, sir, in light of everyone here within the formations and without, you continue to be a great mentor and coach on these matters, really looking forward, future forward, and helping us move in that direction with confidence. So I just want to thank you broadly for the continued support. And to our panelists, our great hosts, all the folks behind the scenes, all the wizards behind the curtains that no one saw but kept us all on track, by our newest teammate, DCS in the private firm that's been helping us. Thank you very much. Great job, including the music between the sessions. Really made this as soft truth number one, human and humane and interactive as possible in this virtual environment. And I want to just take a couple of minutes here just to kind of round out with some overarching comments. Those of you who know me and have heard me a lot, there are a few drums I love to beat a lot, and I'll end this with mentioning one of my favorites. I'm also a Star Wars fan and a Power of Myth fan, so this should be familiar with some of you already. But the great historian, anthropologist Joseph Campbell, and his great work going back to the actually 1949, The Hero's Journey, the hero with 1,000 faces. Talked about this thing called the threshold crossing, right? These imperative epochal change moments in world human history that come along every so often in long cycles of human interaction, human history. We are at one of those. I talk a lot about threshold crossing. We talked a lot about SOF identity at moments of change. We talked in some cases using provocatively the language of SOF as the nations that we serve at a threshold, at a identity crisis. I prefer to think about this in terms of a threshold crossing, right? And another point of the hero's journey. What is that hero in the special operations sense? What has it always been? It's always been about a highly educated, hyper-enabled, whatever of the state-of-the-art technology and techniques and tactics of the day of that age, but a highly educated, hyper-enabled, responsible operator or responsible leader operator. When you look at those at those first letters of those attributes, that's the next threshold, the SOF 5.0, the fourth age of SOF hero, right? And that's what we're really talking about here. That's what we've been talking about the last 2 days. And in this sense of, let me summon Campbell here, and I'll close with this. I see our ultimate challenge being striking a right balance, right, between leading change and preserving, protecting the essence of who we are based on what we do and how as SOF professionals for nation, not self, for nation, not self. So I would close with this. Special operations forces, like the nation or nations that we serve, are yet at another one of these threshold crossings. Our last perhaps being the threshold crossing of 9/11. 2 decades ago, we're at yet another. It's one of compound security that we talked about in yesterday's strategic frames. This new character of global geopolitical competition, frankly, it demands a use and utility of SOF equally compounded. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is a comprehensive combination, and the Vice Admiral talked about this better than I will right now, a comprehensive combination of all the skills, techniques, operational methods, and tradecraft of all past ages, amplified by 21st century emergent technologies, and amplified even further by the broadest sense, context, philosophy, and action of what we talk about in terms of those 2 words, diversity and inclusivity of the force, right? Amplification aspects. A back to our futures philosophy, mind view, and approach to rediscovering SOF's full role, purpose, and identity. That's our imperative going forward. That's what these running quarterly SOF forums, Future of SOF forums, are all about. We intend for these virtual forums every quarter to be those places for discursive, in some cases combative conversation, those safe spaces where in some of our diversity inclusion discussions today, we talked about those rightful places and spaces that are curated to give us all those areas and opportunities for exploring, sharing, and being, quote unquote, who we genuinely are, individually and collectively. Again, ultimately, as professions that we are part of and the professions that we serve within, for nation and national imperative, not ourselves. And then the last 2 most important things I'll say, so I'll leave you with that. But the last 2 most important things I'll say, and they'll kill me if I don't say them. First and foremost, you're going to see, once I leave the screen, you're going to see a Q code for a survey. These are not our grandparents and our parents' surveys, folks. These forms are all of ours, and we really do take seriously what you input on those surveys will definitely be distilled into the next iteration of refreshed and refit SOF curriculum and training POI, programs of instruction. You have a direct hand and therefore responsibility for filling those out, and you'll see this manifest in the current and next generation learning experiences of our SOF forces going forward. The last thing I'll leave you with is, please save the date already. 5-6 May will be our next quarterly running forum. We will be focusing again, Future of SOF in the context of strategic competition. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone again, and most importantly, our Deputy Commander, US SOCOM, as well as all of you, the SOF community and friends of SOF. And with that, have a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week. We'll see you on the 5th and the 6th of May. Thank you very much. Cheers.